story of a paranormal experience I had in Volo, Illinois. One day, when I was in an antique barn, I didn't expect to encounter the so-called ghost of Wallace Gail, but I did. This encounter would lead into years of investigation and culminate in the writing of a book. The spirit of Wallace Gail is not at rest, but I hope that this documentary about what his life was about and what his family and friends went through during the Civil War period will help put him at ease. This was unexpected for me because at the time I was not interested in Civil War history or a ghost. But because of the encounter and the intense investigation of his life, his story gave me quite a bit of knowledge as well as more information on areas of research that I had already been involved in. Welcome to the Secrets of Volo. Hello, I'm Rita G. Moran. Well, who am I? Well, I'm an independent author of books, some for children and many for adults, focusing on mythology, legends, and folklore. Some of my books are fiction and others are not. My main areas of interest include mythologies, religion, spiritualism, ancient Americans, including anomalies found all over the Americas, such as the stories at Lovelock Cave and Etowah Mounds in Georgia. And I specialize in writing stories about the hidden human story, stories that are ignored or just lesser known. I am currently researching red-haired giants or people that were said to have existed not only in ancient Nevada and the mound builder culture, but all over the world. I'm interested in giants and cryptids, and now ghosts. When I'm out in the field and I'm doing research, there are occasional moments that I do encounter paranormal experiences. When I went to Volo, that was one such occurrence. Let me tell you how it began. Lake County, Illinois, has a mystery to it. It is dripping with fresh water via its lakes, bogs, and marshes. Some believe the water holds a record of the land, as well as the emotions of the living beings upon it, because it has a conscience. There's a lot to Lake County that are secrets. I had always heard about the Volo Auto Museum. When I worked up in the area, I tried to go and visit it on my lunch break, but I could strangely never find the place. Then one day in 2003, I took my family to visit the museum. It was beautiful. It was bright. The cars were interesting, and it was a good trip. I do recall one car in particular that was made of glass. Later I would realize that it was a hearse meant to carry a coffin. Inside that glass car was a mannequin of a woman dressed in clothing from the 1800s or the 19th century. It made a lasting impression on me. I would come back with my family to visit the Auto Museum, but it wasn't until April of 2016 that I made it to the antique barn. I had heard that it was haunted, but I didn't believe it. I brought my camera because I always do take pictures, and I find what they had to be very interesting. I was up on the second floor of the old barn, looking around, and my family was there, and I realized that I had walked through a very cold spot when I first entered the barn. That kind of shook me, and it was thick, and it was a very hot day in April. And so I thought it was strange because they didn't really have a lot of air conditioning going on, but it was definitely a very cold spot. When I got into the barn area on the second floor, I started to smell a strange odor that was like something burning, but it had a sweet smell, like a bread smell, baking bread. I asked my family if they could smell it, and nobody could. One of the persons that was working there came up to see if we needed any help, and I asked if they could smell the odor, and they said no, they couldn't. I was the only one that could, and I just didn't know what it was. Then everybody decided to go in a different direction. My family went outside. They were a little bit tired from visiting the museum, and they wanted to just sit and take a break while I looked around at all of the old antiques. I began to realize I was completely alone in this area, and I felt very strange, as if I was being watched. The odor would come and go, and the cold spots would come and go. I then saw the Shadow Man sign and realized this is what people had been talking about. I was in the area. I continued to take pictures, and when I got home, I took a good look at them, and I would see that as I was looking at two military portraits, there appeared to be a reflection of a man standing behind me in the glass on the picture. But there had been nobody there, and no pictures that matched that silhouette. I had wondered, could this have been the ghost that they were talking about of H. Wallace Gail? I was hooked. I had to find out what this was. So I went to bed that night, and I went to sleep, and I began to smell the same odor again while I was sleeping. And I just said, whoever's here, please go on back. I don't want to be scared, but I will look into who you are and let people know. So this began my journey, and there's that picture. Can you see it? That's the silhouette. Do you see the face with the neck? And it looks like he has a cap. And I'm in there as well taking the picture. That's my hand. So I began a journey to find out what was going on in this mall and who was this ghost. I would go back on several occasions, and I would snap pictures and get orbs in the pictures, and I would feel the cold spots again, and I would get different odors. Sometimes it would be burning tobacco. Eventually it would be flower smells after I began to bring flowers to the grave, and back to the sweet smelling odor. The next time around I would almost characterize it as cooking chocolate chip cookies or brown bread, something sweet, something burning. But that was also in October, when it was a warm day, not too cold. But I don't think that they had the heat cranking. I really don't know where the odors were coming from, but it was in the same area I was at before. And it would come and go. I started this journey in 2016. I would find myself just absolutely obsessed with learning the history of this town. And I started out looking at the history of H.W. Gail. I would find out that Volo used to be called Forksville before and during the Civil War. I would find out that this young man was 20 years old when he left to join the Union Army in August of 1862, and he would pass away in February of 1863 after being on a boat ride down the Cumberland, passing through Fort Donelson during the second attempt to take it by the Confederacy. And he would have contracted typhoid fever and die in a hospital in Nashville and be buried at the Nashville National Cemetery. There were a lot of stories going around that he was killed in battle, that he had fought at Fort Donelson, that he starved to death. None of that was true. None of that was true. He had joined up, trained, and was part of the Union Army, heading down to repel a second attempt to take Fort Donelson. And he got sick on the boat, as many men did, because it was extremely cold, and he didn't make it. Now, there was some information that some of his people had to get off the boat and see what was going on after the Union Army repelled the attempt by the Confederates to take Fort Donelson back. Now, I did find memoirs of the soldiers of the Civil War in the Union who recalled that day in February of 1863. To quote, they said, "There was no firing heard. It was evident that the battle was ended, but how it had ended was not known. Caution had to be observed. If the rebels held the fort, it would not do to steam up to the landing. Horsemen were observed in the woods on the right bank of the river, and the steamers landed. The 92nd was quickly on shore and deployed in line of battle. Men were sent to a house some distance up the river, and information obtained that our forces still held the fort, and the enemy had retired from the conflict. The regiment returned to the boats, and the brigade steamed up the river, reaching Fort Donelson at 11 o'clock. The rebel generals Forrest and Wheeler, with about 8,000 men, had at 1 o'clock p.m. of the day before made a desperate assault upon 9 companies of the 83rd Illinois Volunteers and Company C, 2D Illinois Artillery under Colonel A.C. Harding, and kept up the battle till half past 8 p.m. when the rebels withdrew, with a loss of 800 killed and wounded. The ground around the little village of Dover was strewn with the dead, lying as they fell, and for the first time the soldiers of the 92nd looked upon the horror of a battlefield after the carnage was ended. Not quite a year before, the commander of the brigade was there as captain of Company A, 11th Illinois Volunteers, and after dinner, accompanied by some of the members of his staff, he rode out to the long grave to the 11th Illinois, nearly 2 miles from the landing. And while they sat upon their horses with uncovered heads by the graves for the 11th, in a light snowstorm, such as had prevailed at the time, when the men who lay buried there had fallen a year before, the rear guard of Wheeler and Forrest's rebel cavalry sent a few lead-in messages over the party. So, H. Wallace Gail and his 92nd Brigade had come out either at the very end or right after the skirmish and saw all the dead and helped to repel the rebels so they did not feel that they can come back and continue. Thus, he did see battle to a certain degree and carnage before he continued on to Nashville and passed away in the hospital. It's possible that they heard gunfire. It's possible that they were getting off to check on things at the end or during the battle. But as far as I can tell, he made it through all the way to Nashville, and that's when he died. His family were strong abolitionists and had come out from the East Coast with many of their cousins to settle Volo, which, as I said, was called Forksville. I would find out that many of his cousins served in the Union Army, and unfortunately many of them did pass away during the war. I would find out that some of his cousins were involved in the Underground Railroad, and I would surmise that they were involved with it as well up in Volo. And I have heard that rumors are floating around that the Underground Railroad did in fact exist in Volo during the Civil War. I would find out that his family was very involved in education. I would find out that H. Wallace Gail was a teacher before he became a soldier. I would find out that he wanted to come back a hero and get married and have children and be near his family. But unfortunately, he didn't make it back. I would find out that many other men in the area had gone and fought, and many of these young men did not come back. I would write all of this up in 3 books. The 3rd book having the summary of everything that I had found out. I would also delve into the history of his brother and the rest of the family that survived and how hard it was for them. By studying his story, I would learn more about the institution of slavery and how vile it was, and that it wasn't just an institution for black people. That in fact there were several people that were white or almost all white that were sold as slaves, including children that were sold by their parents. I would find out that the justification was cited to be the Old Testament of the Bible for slavery, and that the New Testament or Christianity would be the reason so many fought against slavery to end it. Now, this journey took me on several years of research. I would end up going down to Galesburg. My car got stuck. You can see that. Had a lot of adventures. I would go all over Lake County. I would find out about his cousins in Wisconsin. And I would research Vermont, New Hampshire, and Massachusetts, from where his family came. Even taking a look at Barbados. I wrote about it in a book called Dead Soldiers, Vintage, and Automobiles. Prior to that, I'd written 2 small books, H. Wallace Gail, Henry Wallace Gail, and John Gail, his brother, about those 2 brothers and what their life was like during the Civil War. But I would continue to find out more and more about the secrets of Volo that I just couldn't put the story down. Every time I would walk away, I would get pulled back in. This is a picture, by the way, of the Gail house in Galesburg of one of his cousins who was involved in the Underground Railroad. I believe that Volo was just a stop on the Underground Railroad and that the Gail family, with their tremendous amount of cousins and other families, came out to the middle of this country to create a network of the Underground Railroad and to educate people and to politically try to end slavery. But when they realized that wasn't going to work, they went to war to do so, and they sacrificed. Unfortunately, there's not enough credit given or even any kind of acknowledgement. I hope that by writing this book with all of the details that I have put in will give this spirit some peace. Now, by the way, his name showed up as H. Wallace Gail or H. W. Gail on the censuses and on his cenotaph. But I did find the name Henry Wallace Gail in the Army records. And I believe after going down to Nashville and learning that Johnny Cash, the famous singer, was born J.R. Cash and had to pick a name when he joined the Army, and thus he chose Johnny, that it was a common thing for people to sometimes be named with just an initial. So I believe he probably was born and named H. Wallace Gail and chose the name Henry when he joined the Army. Again, another secret. I would go years studying him and his family. And at the time, I was doing research for my other books on ancient Americans and mythology. And I would be incredibly surprised that the story of H. Wallace Gail would lead me to find out about the mound builders in Lake County and the Chicagoland area. I have just begun to uncover their story, as well as the story of giants that were found not just in Lake County, but Chicago. This story will be told in another book. At some point I thought perhaps I was done with the story of H. Wallace Gail and the Secrets of Volo, but every time I walked away, I always got pulled back in. At one point, the owner of the antique barn was going to put a display case together for H. Wallace Gail. He began to collect items, and I was helping him out. Unfortunately, Mr. Bill Grams passed away in May of 2020 unexpectedly. At this point, I knew the display was not going to be done. However, I did put a display up in my house, and I created the Volo Historical Society online. Thinking that I was done, I was shocked when I went down to Nashville, Tennessee, and I had a series of experiences. At the time, I was interested in visiting the Parthenon Museum that was part of a World Fair in Nashville, and wasn't thinking about H. Wallace Gail and the Civil War. But as we drove through the town, I had some strange feelings when I passed by several old buildings that called to me and that I felt had a connection to the Civil War. I would later find out that many of these old buildings were old Civil War hospitals or on the site of where Civil War hospitals were located. I would also find that the restaurant that I had lunch in the last day I was there was sitting on the site of the hospital in which H. Wallace Gail passed away in. I would take a walk on the pedestrian bridge across the Cumberland and be a little bit afraid, but thought of H. Wallace Gail and his bravery. When I came back, I saw the word star-crossed engraved on the ground before the bridge. I had an idea that we had time to visit the Nashville National Cemetery. We had a few hours before the plane came. So we drove out. We didn't know where his grave was. We had somewhat of an idea, and we saw a woman that we asked where his grave was after we had driven a bit and parked the car. She was a caretaker of the cemetery, a black supervisor with several men that were cleaning up some of the graves. She was shocked and told us, "You parked right in front of his grave." And sure enough, she was absolutely right. We had pulled up and parked right in front of his grave and didn't even know it. I was very emotional. I thanked him and everybody else for their sacrifice. I don't know if this is the end to his story for me, but certainly it's not the end of the secrets of Volo in the area, because my research into ancient Americans of the area is ongoing. If you'd like to learn more, you may purchase my book online, Dead Soldiers, Vintage and Automobiles. It's on Amazon currently. And you could read for yourself all of the details that I uncovered. I hope you have enjoyed this presentation, and I'll finish up showing you some of the models that I created of the old town of Volo and the smallest historical society ever in a dollhouse with its own secret. Here you see some furniture, and we'll go slowly through of what things would have looked like in a home in that time period. And then we'll find out what the secrets are in this historical society. There you go. He has Zeus and the Olympians in one of the rooms of this historical society. And there's more in the attic. A bunch of creatures from mythology. The town of Volo is named after a Greek town in Greece. And as you know, the Olympians are Greek gods. So I find it interesting that all the roads come together in Volo with many secrets. And here is another historical society dollhouse with an ancient American getting ready to reveal their secrets of Volo, and some Egyptians, and some Irish leprechauns, and Chicago, because Chicago also has many secrets, and I'm working on revealing those soon. So stay tuned. I hope you have enjoyed this documentary, and I hope you do purchase the book and learn more. Thank you.